All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Lovecraft eZine podcast. Today, our guest is Richard Thomas. Hey, how are you, Richard?
I'm great, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Thanks for coming on. No relation to our friends Scott Thomas and Jeffrey Thomas. So
Not to my knowledge, no.
you never know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't we do introductions like we always do? DeBronzo said he was going to be here, but he might be late. So I'm Mike Davis, of course. And Rick, why don't you introduce yourself?
Rick Lay, writer and pulp magazine collector.
And overall encyclopedic knowledge of everything.
Yeah, exactly. Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt. I run Lovecraft eZine Movie Night. We just watched Deliver Us from Evil last night, and we're voting on this coming week's feature. But we have a prize for you if you want to try to win it. It's called The Last Ritual. It's an Arkham horror novel, a nice trade paperback. To win this book, to enter, actually, you send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com, put ritual in the subject heading. We usually draw the winner in about 6 weeks from the podcast, so you got plenty of time to get an entry in. And you might win if you enter.
There's your surprise, Richard.
Oh, hey, what's up, guys?
Hey, how's it going?
Good to see you, buddy. Long time.
I didn't tell him you were coming, Gus.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's great.
We were just doing introductions. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Gus Moreno, author of This Thing Between Us. Happy to be tagging along on this.
Yeah,
Hey, nice.
good to see you again, buddy.
Yeah, good to see you too.
So you mentioned to me in an email that you knew Richard. So I can't remember what you said. How?
Wow, back in, I think it's been like 15 years that I first met Richard. We met in on the message boards of the Chuck Palahniuk website.
Yeah, the cult.
That's where we first met. And then we got to know each other in the Craig Clevenger writing intensive.
Yep.
And then we were part of this year-long Chuck Palahniuk writing workshop where Richard was one of the moderators and I was just one of the writers, and we were both submitting and critiquing our own work. So yeah, I'm very familiar with Richard's work. I think he's the second author reading that I've ever been to.
Oh wow!
Richard and Nick Corpin read in Chicago. Yeah,
that's hilarious. Yeah. Now, were you hanging out at the Velvet as well?
No, I did not. I never moved to the Velvet. Yeah, it was always the cult website.
Yeah. The cult was Chuck's website, and then a branch of that was the place called the Velvet, where it was Will Christopher Bear and Craig Clevenger, who Gus just mentioned, and Stephen Graham Jones.
Yeah.
So Will, or Chris, wrote 3 great books, really kind of defined the neo-noir voice for me, and I know for a lot of people, and then kind of became a recluse and kind of disappeared. Craig kind of did the same thing, wrote 2 great books, and then he's been around. He's still around. I see him on Facebook and stuff, but is trying to as a 3rd book, and those 5 books really kind of, I think, woke me up and shaped me as a neo-noir author. And then Stephen has gone on to be quite successful, probably the most prolific of all 3, and definitely writes way more horror than just neo-noir. But I always go back to one of his early books, All the Beautiful Sinners, as one of my favorite books of his of all time. And I would call that neo-noir. It's kind of this No Country for Old Men meets, I don't know, it's it's a Native American Indian cop, hallucinogenic fireman, tornadoes. It's a really weird mix of what was Silence of the Lambs. Silence of the Lambs kind of meets No Country for Old Men. And it's a brilliant book, but it's a challenging read. But then Stephen has obviously gone on to do a lot of horror. And so I would say of the 3, really of those 4, if you're including Chuck, that Stephen and Chuck have probably been some of the biggest influences on me in my writing, although I don't write like Chuck per se. He really got me. Basically, my whole writing career started by seeing Fight Club and then coming over to the cult and hanging out for a long time, just hanging out. And then when Craig came in there, I've been reading his work. I said, well, I have to take a class with Craig. And Craig's the one who's responsible for really pushing me to send my work out into the world. And one of my stories from his class called Stillness was my first professional sale that ended up being acquired by Cemetery Dance for their Shivers 6 anthology, where I ended up being in there alongside Stephen King and Peter Straub and Brian
Nice.
Hodge and a couple other people. Just really an amazing. I've been a fan of Stephen King since high school. To be in an anthology with him, was pretty stunning to me. So, yeah, just so that's going back to our roots, back to the cult and the Velvet, and coming up. And I took classes with Jack Ketchum over there too. Rest in peace. And between Jack and Craig and Chuck and Stephen Graham Jones and Monica Drake and Max Berry, it kind of got me started writing. And so I took a bunch of classes, and then we ended up editing an anthology that came out of that workshop called Burnt Tongues, which did quite well. And so Medallion had it, and then they went out of business, and then Turner reacquired it. And Gus, you had a story in there. What was the name of your story?
Yeah, I had a story in there called Survived.
Yeah. And that anthology really has gotten some legs in that it's still being published and sold some foreign rights, and just kind of really happy it's still out there being published. But yeah, some really great places to hang out. That's nice to see you, Gus. It's been too long.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Yeah, we've had Stephen Graham Jones and Brian Hodge on a couple times
Nice.
on the show. So yeah, he's they're both fascinating guys to talk to, and really
There
great
was a bunch
writers.
of great people in that anthology. Brian Freeman and Keelan Patrick Burke and a bunch of people. So just kind of getting your first pro sale out there is always exciting. And that was kind of the thing that got me thinking that, well, maybe I don't totally suck. Maybe I should keep trying to write, And so by the time I was done taking a bunch of classes with all those people I just mentioned, that ended up leading me towards getting my master's degree. So I was at that point taking it more seriously to go do a low res program, and then graduated from there in 2012. And that kind of got me to writing, editing, teaching, publishing. I ran Dark House Press for a couple of years, where we put out 8 different books, including 2 anthologies. One of them, The New Black, is a bunch of neo-noir and exigencies, was nominated for a Shirley Jackson Award. Stephen published a collection with us that was nominated for both a Bram Stoker and Shirley Jackson Award. And then I ran Gamut magazine for a couple of years. We started with a Kickstarter where we raised like 55 grand. And I probably should have budgeted for 3 years, because I didn't think, when you're creating a brand, I'm sure you guys are all aware of how this works, but it takes time for people to find you and to really connect and to sign up and buy in. And
Yeah.
I think at the time 50 grand seemed like an insane amount of money, and I'm like, there's no way I'm going to raise it, but I wanted to pay 10 cents a word. And so we had one great glorious year, and then not enough people signed up for the second year, and so we just couldn't make it happen. But
Nominated for a Shirley Jackson, though. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I've been nominated for Bram Stoker, Shirley Jackson, a Thriller Award for my book Disintegration, an Audie, and then I'm hoping that my new collection, Spontaneous Human Combustion, can get some Bram Stoker love. That I would one of the stories in there, the final story, the anchor story, is a novelette called Ring of Fire, and it made the preliminary Bram Stoker ballot, but didn't make the final. And so I would love to have this collection be on the final ballot. And I don't know if I could win. It really depends on who I'm up against. It's every year you're like I looked at last year's and I'm like, oh, please don't, please don't publish next year. Like if it's a big enough name you're up against, I'm like, well, I'm not going to beat Steven, or even like AC Wise has a great one. And I'm like, please, Stephen King, don't put one out. I'm just up Paul Tremblay. I'm like, anybody just gonna have a year where there's like a chance. Okay, just have a chance. And so I haven't seen everybody who has something coming out this year.
Paul told me that his school's giving him a year off.
Oh, yeah.
So he's gonna get some more writing out there.
Good, but it won't be out until next year.
The nice thing about the Shirley Jacksons, though, is if you're nominated, you still get the rock.
Still get the rock,
whether you win or not. So
yes, I got it right here. Here, my camera.
I think mine's back on that shelf over there. Yeah, they're cool.
2015, yeah, that's really cool. And then as an editor too, it's very exciting to have people I published. When the first story in Exigencies was called Wilderness by Letitia Trent, and that story, when I was putting together the anthology, I was looking around for stories. I wasn't quite getting the caliber of work I wanted. So I just reached out to a bunch of people I knew and said, hey, if you got anything, send it over. And she says, oh, I got this story. I don't know. It's been rejected by everybody. I don't know if it's any good or not. I'm like, oh, well, the way you build it up. Yeah, send it over. She sent it over and I loved it. I loved it from the jump. And I just kept reading it saying, please don't screw this up. Please stick the landing, make it work. And once I was done reading it, I'm like, I love it. So I bought it on the spot. It was the first story in the anthology. And so not only did the anthology get nominated for Shirley Jackson, but then her story got nominated for Shirley Jackson, which when you realize how many, I think that's even more impressive because in any given year, you might have, I don't know, 50 or 60 anthologies. You're going to have thousands of short stories. Everybody's got a short story. I mean, each person could put out anywhere from 3 to 10 stories a year, right? So it's a ton. So to make that much smaller list as an individual, and then that story got selected by Ellen Datlow to be in Best Horror of the Year. So it's one of those really cool, as an editor, kind of
Hat trick.
proud papa, proud uncle, proud friend. I was really excited for her to, because I saw that story and believed in it and wanted her to believe in it. So seeing that story have that journey was really exciting. I had one of my students, Shaw Coyne, have a novella they were writing, and I just loved it. The whole time we were workshopping, I just kept encouraging them to send it. And I said, when you're done, let me know, and I'll reach out to Ellen Datlow and see if I can, because I had a co-written story in Best Horror of the Year 2 years ago called Golden Sun that I co-wrote with Christy DeMeester and Damien Angelica Walters and Michael Wehunt. And so the rule I'd always heard was once you get in, then you can talk to Ellen. I mean, I've been talking to Ellen for years, but I try to never ask her for favors. Kind of like I never try to ask, Chuck Palahniuk for favors because I just feel like I don't know, I don't want to bother them, and who am I to ask them for a favor? But I love the novella so much. I asked Ellen if she would take a look at it, and she ended up buying it for Tor, and so that was really exciting because I know that Shaw was like, I don't know if it's working, it's too weird. And I'm like, no, I love this story. You have to I will call in a favor. I will toss in one of my chits. I don't know how many I get, but I will reach out to Ellen and connect you because I think she's good. And it was so nice of her to. She's so gracious. I'm still intimidated when I hang out with her in public, but she was just so nice. She even mentioned in the announcement that this came from me and that, I suggested it and that she loved it. So she gave me a little credit on it. That was nice because, Ellen's kind of the queen of horror, right? And pretty much any anthology she puts out is worth picking up. So
yeah, that's what I always say when she's on the show. If you see her as the editor on the cover, you should just pick it up.
Yeah.
I think we've had her guys more on the show than any other person.
Wow.
It's like, awesome. Well, she's got an anthology coming out, and then she'll email me and she'll be like, yeah, I need to come on the show and talk about this. I'm like, all right.
That's great. That's great.
Mike DeBronzo is here. Why don't you introduce yourself and we'll keep talking to Richard.
Hey guys, it's Mike DeBronzo, architect artist, not Pete Rollick. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you. So you go by Richard or Rich, or does it matter?
Yeah, Richard.
Richard. Okay. You said several times that you found out that you don't suck. Your new book is Spontaneous Human Combustion. And I saw in a couple interviews, I think, email interviews, that you feel like this is the best thing you put out. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. I mean, as writers, it's hard. I think I've been writing for 14 years now, and when I look back on my earlier work, it's kind of cringy sometimes. It's hard to look at our older work because I was still learning and growing and evolving, and and I was a much different writer before and after, every class I took, and before and after my MFA, before and after reading people like Haruki Murakami and China Mieville and Shirley Jackson and Mary Gateskill and Cormac and Stephen Graham Jones and Brian Evanson and anybody in my MFA, everybody I read that really spoke to me. AC Wise, her story Harvest Song, Gathering Song has been as much of an influence on my work as anybody. So I think it's over the years you have to keep evolving, right? So you have to keep reading and you have to keep pushing yourself to get better. So I when I look back to my early collections, not that there's anything wrong with the work. I just look at it and go, I feel like I could have done more there. Or, I came up doing more neo-noir, more gritty kind of crime and realism, and then shifted over more into the supernatural and speculative work and kind of the new weird, and that has all kind of changed a bit of the focus of what my work is these days. So this collection, is mostly from the last 5 years of my writing. So I would hope that it's my best work to date, just by a matter of evolving as a writer. I talk to my students a lot about, finding their voice and then honing their craft and evolving, learning critical analysis, applying the same edits to their work that they would to the best, writers they're reading. Through my classes, we go from short story mechanics to contemporary dark fiction to my advanced creative writing workshop, so that they progress and they learn the basics, and then they hone their craft and they are critical of their work in a way that they're trying to look at the stories in best of the year and say, okay, why does this work? If this story worked for me, if I'm giving this a 9 or a 10, what's working in this story, and where is my work in comparison to them? And then how can I close that gap? How can I elevate my prose? Because if we're trying to break into any of these top markets, whether it's Cemetery Dance or Nightmare or The Dark or fantasy and science fiction or Clark's World or whoever you like, it's hard, right? I mean, it's like 1% acceptance rate or 3% acceptance rate or 0.5% acceptance rate. So you have to be like 1 in 100, right, to get in. And so the stories in here are my most recent work, and I'm lucky that I've been able to work with a number of really amazing editors who keep inviting me back to be a part of their projects, because those relationships I think are really important. So I don't know if any of you guys have established great relationships with editors, but myself working with like Michael Bailey across the Chiral Mad series, I've been in 2, 3, and 4, I think, and then working with Doug Morano. And then, a number of other editors out there, Joe Meinhardt at Crystal Lake, right?
Yeah, if I could just jump in, I totally agree with you on the relationships thing. Whatever kind of creator you are, whether you're a writer, illustrator, you do book covers, you're a podcast guy like me, the relationships are so important, and your reputation is so important.
Totally. And I think what's cool about coming, I mean, I'm out there in the slush piles with everybody else. I have a story I'm shopping right now called The Keeper of the Light. It's been rejected some 15 times already by all the best publications.
You got to have a thick skin.
Yeah, totally. And so
Yeah.
I no one's just taking my story because I'm me. I mean, I had somebody once say, "Oh, Richard, your whole career has been handed to you, on a golden
What?
spoon." I'm like, I don't know what you're
You
talking
fucking
about.
kidding me?
I'm like, no, anything I've
It may
gotten,
look that way from the outside, right?
No, I mean, it's I think what sometimes people see is they see a social network and they see you interacting with people and they're like, oh, you know them and they're going to invite you. I'm like, yeah, but I still have to deliver. People act like I have turned in stories to editors that I know and been rejected because the story wasn't good enough, right? So when I work with people, I still have to bring my A game. And in fact, I think, turning in a story to Michael or Joe or Doug, I feel in some ways there's almost more pressure because I've given them good work. Doug won a Bram Stoker for his anthology Behold, and I had the anchor story in there, and it was a really weird story called Haraith, and I brought in the story and said I have 2 versions. One where you have a beginning and an end, and they bookend it, and the middle's a different thing. So we have 2 different realities. Or we can just cut off the beginning, start in the middle, and at the end we're going to have this hard right turn. I said the second version I think is definitely more risky. And I think people are going to love it or they're going to hate it. It's definitely going to be more polarizing. The first one's safer. I said, I think they both work, but I don't know which one you want to publish. And he said, I would have leaned towards the riskier one. He read them both and said, let's do this one. And so and the fact that he put it in as the anchor story in the anthology told me a lot, because when I put together my anthologies, I try to start with a good one and end with a good one. And then I try and put these pillars in between, and then you have long and short and dark and light and first person and third
little
person.
Things like little things like the first story too, in the anthology, because what do a lot of Kindle readers do? They get that sample. They read the sample. If you've got a really, really strong story at the beginning, not that they aren't all strong, they should be, but you want the reader to be going, damn, I want more of this, and they click the buy button.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, and the tricky part too is, because it's all subjective. What I love, you're talking about spontaneous human combustion, is that I have my favorites in the collection, but like when I see somebody love one of the stories that maybe I don't put as highly ranked as others, like that, I love that, because I look at this a couple of stories and go, oh, this poor story. I'm like, this weird thing I tried to do, and like when somebody calls that out as one of their favorites, I'm like, oh, that makes me feel better, because I don't want to put a weak story in there, you know. So when I get a 5-star review, or I have some YouTuber who was saying, you know, that there wasn't a weak story in there and that they loved the whole thing and it was the best collection they read of the year, like that means a lot to me, because I really am trying to put my best work out there, and you never know. It's so subjective if a story is going to go over with somebody or not, right? So I just, you know, I think at this point in my career, I've tried to hone my craft and get to a place where I can consistently put out really great stories. That every story I sit down to write, I don't want it to be good. I don't want it to be okay. I want it to be great. I want it to be special. And
Yeah.
if I can't do that, I'm not going to turn it in, right? So I really, you know, fret over that and work with my editors, much like I mentioned with Doug there. We had another story I turned in for, I think it was, I forget which anthology it was, but I turned the story Repent. That's the first story in the collection.
Oh yeah, that's a dark one. Yeah.
Yeah, and when I turned it in, I was like, okay, this is great. I like what happened. Everything works, right? And then Doug and David Ward, D. Alexander Ward, came back to me and were like, yeah, this is great, but we don't quite buy the transition from the bad cop to the good father. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? You know what you're talking about. I've been doing this a long time. Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I go and I look at the story. And I'm like, shoot. I'm like, you're right. It isn't quite there. I need to do a bit more with this. And so it was really only a matter of a line here, a line there, a paragraph here, a little more connective tissue. And then it really made a huge difference in the story. A couple lines here and there, and then a bigger paragraph to show the softer side of him, to show the family history. So that when you get to the end and he makes this, you know, sacrifice, you believe it. Turned it back in, they're like, okay, good. Right, you know, that's that. We love it. You're in. We accept it. So it doesn't mean that, you know, everything I touch is perfect. Far from it. And in fact, more and more these days, when I try more risky stuff, I tend to bounce it off a beta reader, or even hire an editor myself to have somebody, you know. I have a good friend of mine, Repo Kemp, who really helped me with my novel, my Arctic horror Sin Eater novel, Incarnate, which my agent is shopping right now, because he spent time in the Arctic. And so like I turned over a lot of that book to him and said, hey, run through this, please, tear it apart, tell me what I screwed up, you know, give me the history and culture, let me know what works and what doesn't, you know. And he made that book a better book by his involvement with it. So
I've said on the show before,
yeah.
that I told a friend of mine, John Paget, what a great book he had written. You know, I said, this is just pure genius, Secret of Ventriloquism. And he kind of laughed, and he said that, you know, basically it took him 10 years or so to remember, years and years to write it, and probably 100 revisions.
Yeah.
But you know, the public, the readers, they just see the final product.
Yeah.
You know, so revise and revise and revise again. Before we continue, I just really truly would like to say to the listeners and viewers, Spontaneous Human Combustion, this is a really great collection. Some really great stories. Let me just read a couple of these on the back. You know, because when they sent this book to me and I got the, I first thing I did was I looked at the back. I'm like, man, this is going to be a damn good collection. A poker game yields a strange prize that haunts one man. His game of chance now turned into a life or death coin flip. A fantasy world is filled with one man's desire to feel whole again, finally finding love, only to have the shocking truth of his life exposed in an appalling twist. A clown takes off his makeup in a gloomy basement to reveal something more horrifying under the white, tacky skin. I've just read a couple of them, but yeah, it's a great collection. So guys, you should buy it. So.
Thanks. Yeah, it's funny. I've never written a clown story, and there's two in here. The one that you were just talking about, Clown Face, which is shorter, and this other one, A Caged Bird Sings in a Darkness of Its Own Creation, which is part of the Shallow Creek kind of built world, shared world. And that one's definitely very weird. It's kind of 4 acts, second act with this kind of creator presence. It's just a pretty, definitely some Lovecraftian elements in there, I think. Yeah. So I love getting two clown stories in there. And it's funny, the first one you read is Notice Tolan's, which is this poker story that I think is probably the most Stephen King sounding voice I've ever written, because I'm more of a shower than a teller, and I'm a lot more of a maximalist, and so I like heavy settings, sensory detail, whereas, you know, Stephen King is more of a storyteller. He tells you, and I think you run through it, and it's a lot less about density. And then the other one you mentioned was Haraith, what I just talked about. That's the one with the twist ending, with the the bookends and we cut off the beginning. So it's an interesting mix. I think the title I think could be a bit misleading in that some people, it's not spontaneous human combustion about people bursting into flames, although there are some moments like that in there. It's about
Yeah, I was going to
spontaneous-
ask you about the title.
yeah, for sure. It's spontaneous human combustion. So it's the idea of our humanity, who we are as human beings, and the monsters that lurk inside us, and the ways that we tamp them down. And sometimes we succeed, and sometimes we fail. It's a story of the stories. There's a lot of vengeance and justice and righting wrongs. There's a lot of hope in this collection too, because I think at the time everything was just so bleak over the last 4 years between war and COVID and things and elections and whatnot, that I just I couldn't keep writing. I couldn't do Requiem for a Dream, right? I couldn't do down, everything stays down, splat, just like bleak. Although there are a few stories in there where the horror wins, but so I think that what appealed to me, the common theme running through this collection is about, there's an old, I think, Native American adage about the two wolves that live inside us, right? Which one survives? Love and hate. Which one survives? The one you feed, right? And so I think there's a lot of that in this story, in this collection too, where I played on the ideas of, one story is called Repent, and another is called Requital, right? Dealing with the duality of human nature, positive and negative, and how we harness and deal with these dark thoughts, and how we deal with that inside us and then out in the world too.
Bridget just joined us. You want to introduce yourself, Bridget?
Oh, hello. Hi,
Sure.
Richard. Hi, Gus.
Hi.
Hi.
You went to Monsterpalooza, right?
I did. Yeah, I can talk
Yeah.
about it more later. I don't want to take time
I
away
just
from these guys, but
No, I just wanted to throw that out there. We'll talk about that in a little bit after we.
yeah, it was super fun. But hi, everybody. I'm Bridget. I'm composer, artist, create things, stuff and things. Got a Facebook group called Haunting Melody Horror Music Group. So if you're into talking about horror music, come pop over and join us. It's a good time.
Nice.
It is.
Very cool. Very cool.
So it must have felt pretty good to you, Richard. I'm guessing, after being on Chuck's message boards and so forth and everything, and he gave this book a really nice blurb, which grabbed me too when I saw the book. So
The blurb is like phenomenal.
Yeah.
Here's what it is. In range alone, Richard Thomas is boundless. He is Lovecraft. He is Bradbury. He is Gaiman. And I'm like, all three of those guys I love,
It's giving me chills, goosebumps. I mean, I love Chuck. Chuck is one of the nicest guys you will ever meet. He's super generous, but for a long time, I thought he really did not like my writing. Partly because during this whole thing, Guskin, talking about burnt tongues in the workshop, I got my work in front of him as a workshop moderator because everything went up to Dennis Widmeyer, who was the other editor, blind. And so whatever they read at the next level, nobody knew. Because I was a moderator, I could still submit work. Or anybody, there were like 2 or 3 moderators, and we each would pick like our 5 or 6 favorite stories from that month. I couldn't pick my own work. So the 2 other moderators, if my work was good enough, it would get nominated. And I got nominated 3 times. And all 3 times I got in front of Chuck, he tore those stories apart, including one that ended up making it into Cemetery Dance magazine. So it's like this. Like I wanted the love and adoration of Chuck, but I'm a very different writer. He's a minimalist. He has a good amount of humor in his work, really transgressive. I think the transgressive stuff might cross over a bit, but I'm a maximalist, heavy setting, heavy sensory detail. And he was calling me out on some of that stuff, saying, I don't know if you need all this setting in here and stuff. And so when Cemetery Dance took it, I was thrilled because I was like, well, Chuck said it was bad. It must be bad. But then what ended up happening was kind of this lucky situation that I ended up becoming one of the co-editors because one of the guys in charge with it wasn't placing it. And so Dennis and Chuck asked me if I would come on board and help try and shop it. And so I was excited to do that. And because I didn't have a story in there, I could do that, right? And then shopped it and sold it to Medallion. And it worked. We had like a bidding war between 3 or 4 different presses for it. And they offered us a really nice big advance that ended up, we could double the rate we paid our authors. And then, like I said, Turner picked it up when it went out.
Like that.
Yeah, yeah, and
Oh yeah, I did.
and when Turner picked it up too, we were able to give them a little bit extra love too, financially speaking. But I mean, the exposure for that anthology, and then I know a bunch of people were able to go on tour with Chuck. Were you one of the people that got to read with Chuck, Gus, or no?
Oh no, I definitely threw my head in there though.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
was not one of the lucky ones.
Yeah, which would have been cool. Sorry that didn't work out, but yeah. So I mean, Chuck's blurb. I mean, okay, just to tell you, we talk about imposter syndrome as writers a lot, I think.
Oh, sure.
And all of us, no matter how successful you are, no matter how much you level up, I think you question yourself even more. It's like whenever I do break into a great magazine or a great anthology, the next thing I immediately think is, oh, please don't let me be the worst story in here. Like, I want to get in, I want to be alongside it. And you see the table of contents, you're like, oh my God, look at all these people. I love all these people in here. And then you're like, oh shit, please don't let me be the worst story in here. Because there's nothing worse than having a reviewer call it out and go, yeah, here's all the ones I loved. You don't see your name. And these didn't work for me. And Richard, I'm like, damn it. So it's painful. But for Chuck, that I almost didn't even send him a request for a blurb. So I put together a list of like 30 people, gave it to Turner, said, here's people I know, people I think who might dig it, people who are writing similar things. Like, we don't see Chuck on the because they'd already, we already partnered for Burnt Tongues, the reprint. And I'm like, yeah, all right, I'm gonna go out. Like, I hate asking him for favors anyway, but I didn't want to send him a note because I didn't want him to reject me. And so when I got that back, I was shocked. I think I might have cried. I think I've cried. Well, I cry a lot, but I cried. I cried when I got into Shiver 6 alongside Stephen King because I didn't think that was ever going to happen. And that was my first pro sale. And getting this back from Chuck, I was like, is somebody pranking me? Like, is this Chuck's like administrative assistant or something? And on top of that, to compare me to 3 authors that I love and that I feel like is a really great. I think it's a very accurate combination of what I'm trying to do. Between the Lovecraft and the new weird I'm trying to do. Bradbury, what a classic, voice, and the density of his work. And Gaiman, what a modern, fantasy, speculative writer. I mean, what a great name. So those 3 put together, I mean, I couldn't have asked for a better blurb. So of course, Turner put it right on the cover.
That's where as it belongs. That's where it belongs. Yeah. And Larry was talking one time on Twitter that some writers have a problem with this. And he was like, I don't understand. You want to compare me favorably to a great writer? I'll take it. Sure. Influences. And there's another interview that I read with you. Another interview of yours that I read, where you said, I think a good amount of my writing in the last 2 years has been influenced by a few TV shows, such as Black Mirror and Tales from the Loop. I'm also a big fan of A24 films, so quite a few of those contributed to my work. Hereditary, The Witch, Under the Skin, Enemy, and so forth and so on. When I was, before I knew Paul Tremblay and I was reading A Head Full of Ghosts, I was thinking, he wears all these influences on his sleeve. He's not afraid to say, I'm influenced by this. And I think that's a great thing to do,
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you could really, unless you're taking stories verbatim, line by line, sentence by sentence. There's no way you're going to be able to steal someone's work. I can't sound like Stephen King. I can't sound like Chuck Palahniuk. I can't sound like Brian Evanson or Stephen Graham Jones. I can only sound like me. I can study them. I can love them. They can influence my writing. So I mean, the idea that I can't see any way that you could really steal from anybody, because I still have to get that story across the finish line. I have to do all the freight tag stuff. I have to have the narrative hook and the inciting incident and the internal external conflict, all this rising tension building up to a climax, a resolution, the denouement, the epiphany, the understanding. Like, I still have to do all those things. And right. So if I'm just trying to rip somebody off, and I can't do it, because I end up going my own way. I'm not big on dialogue. I can't do the humor. I think with Stephen Graham Jones, the intimacy is one thing that I like, that kind of informal, casual tone he has sometimes, where you feel you're invited into a situation and you're privy to something that the rest of the world might not see. So maybe I picked up on that from him. But yeah, I love being, if anybody compares me to writers I consider bigger and better than me, sure.
Yeah.
But I
don't think it was really about stealing, but more about the influence, which I don't see why anyone would have a problem with that. I want to let Gus ask you a couple of questions.
Cool.
But before I do that, I noticed on the live chat, the way this works, Richard, is that we're doing a live show right now, and then people later will watch it on YouTube, and the vast majority will listen to it because they can listen on the go.
Yeah.
When I upload it and make it just a regular podcast, just the audio only. That said, I know how this is, but I don't know how to pronounce your name, Cabo. Richard, this sounds excellent. Very excited and looking forward to this. Gus, absolutely loved your last book. So there you go.
Cool.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I thought it was okay.
Appreciate that. Richard, I do have some questions. So like when I do think of like Richard Thomas like fiction, I think of like neo-noir, and I think of like sensory details, like rich sensory details. But like your work through the years has like, you know, like your first novel kind of felt like Lost, and then like Disintegration is like much more of like hard boiled. And then now like this short story collection feels more like on the horror side. So is it just like you just like write what you want to write, and then like these like turns into different genres like just happen naturally, or do you feel like, no, there are these things that I like doing, like the noir aesthetic, these like heightened sensory details, and I just want to like consciously enter these different genres with that filter and like see what comes out of it? Like is it just like organic, or more of an intention there?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, actually. I mean, I think part of my journey has been, I loved writing neo-noir and more crime thriller type stuff when I was coming up. I think after a couple of years of writing that, I got a little bored with it, in that I wanted to do some weirder things. And so I think coming into horror, I mean, you could do, Jack Ketchum has a lot of realism-based horror, right? I think the more I read, the more I saw what was possible. I mean, Chuck showed me one thing, you know, Bear and Clevenger showed me another thing, right? Dennis Lehane. I mean, a lot of people showed me these different things, but I think as I got more into it, I wanted to write more horror, and that got me into fantasy and science fiction and other speculative genres. So I think part of it was I felt there was a bigger sandbox to play in. And I saw that more and more places, unfortunately, there aren't as many markets for neo-noir crime realism-based thrillers unless it leans into horror, right? I saw a lot more opportunity across the fantasy, sci-fi, and horror realms. And so I think that tied in with the fact that a couple of seminal works that really spoke to me, like Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation, was one that really woke me up. And even before that was China Mieville's Perdido Street Station, which I read over a 3-month period working at this advertising agency, where I would walk to a bus, to a train, to a metro, out to the suburbs, and I would go to this little Thai restaurant down the street, and I would sit there and I'd read. This book is like 700 pages. And so Annihilation, Perdido, Sarah Grand's book Come Closer, and then more recently, Josh Mallerman's Bird Box. So I think the influence, and then plus the influence of people like Stephen and Brian Evanson, as I kind of started sliding more into the weird, into the new weird and the transgressive, and more Lovecraft, more cosmic horror, I just was having more fun with it. And so I think part of it was I felt like those genres also really call for a heavy atmosphere and setting a lot of the time. And I felt like that was a place I could do it and that would be appreciated. Whereas what I love about Bear's work, you know, is that he's pretty weird and he's pretty lyrical and pretty out there. But that was the first time I'd really seen anybody write neo-noir in such a lyrical, like poetic voice. And I don't know of many people who've done it since him. Him and Craig both. So I think part of it was I was finding more people in the horror community who were doing things like this. And that got me excited to do it. So I think it was partly a conscious decision. I used to say my work was neo-noir transgressive thrillers, and I would say that was Disintegration and Breaker. The more recent work I would say is neo-noir speculative thrillers. So that I like the fast pace, I like the atmosphere, mood, and tone, the kind of bleakness of neo-noir, and then under the umbrella of fantasy, sci-fi, and horror. Like the last story in this collection, Ring of Fire, was I was invited into this anthology, 7 Deadliest Sins, and I was given the sin lust. And so I had to do horror and lust, and I didn't want it to be like Hellraiser, and I didn't want it to be like, you know, rapey or misogynistic. So I had to be really careful about how I could find this balance between, you know, horror and lust. And it ended up becoming this horror sci-fi thing that I wasn't expecting. when I sat down to write it. So I think sometimes, Gus, what I try and do is I go into the story with an idea, but sometimes it changes. Sometimes it surprises me and it becomes something I didn't intend. But when I get to the heart of it, it makes sense. One of the things at the heart of that story is this whole concept of the 100th monkey. I don't know if any of you guys have heard this thing before. It was a phenomenon off the coast of Japan. I'll try and tell it real quickly, but basically a bunch of monkeys were getting dirt in their food. And so the baby monkeys went down to the water to wash their coconuts, and then the other baby monkeys started doing it, and then the older monkeys started doing it. And usually it's the older monkeys who dictate what happens. So you have younger monkeys, you have older monkeys, and then all the monkeys of this breed started doing it on the island, and then all the monkeys on the island started doing it. I think they were macaw or something, and then all the macaws in the world started doing it, and then all the monkeys in the world started doing it. There's a spontaneous evolution of this collective subconscious. And it was such a weird concept that I just, for years, I've been looking for a place to put it into a story. And so this comes back to kind of Black Mirror, that watching that show, I was like, holy shit, this is so weird. And I'm like, it was kind of a modern day Twilight Zone, Tales from the Loop, all of these, anthology series, and A24 and all their films started really showing me you could do more with your stories. And so that was one part of the story. There were these disembodied voices that were watching. They're not sure if they're scientists or prison wardens or aliens. You don't know what they are. And then there's this third element, this chorus that runs through it of just like items. And I don't tell you what the items are, but if you can put the puzzle together, you get a sense of what's going to happen. And then the last scene is this epilogue at the end, which I also didn't see coming. There was this shift in point of view, and that really, to me, I think, made the story, because I didn't want. It's basically this idea of man being the monkey, that we are the 1000th monkey. Can man evolve and become better? Right. And so this other character taking over the story, there was this really nice little blossom of hope at the end, which was crucial to me in writing this story. So I knew I wanted to do that, but I wasn't sure how I was going to get there. So when I handed the baton to the female character at the end, that to me made that story work. So it's partly going in with an idea of what I want to do, partly me leaning into my strengths and weaknesses as a writer, and then partly being open to whatever's presented to me or what I find along the way. I'm a pantser, not a plotter, but I had a general idea of what I wanted to do. And then once I got into it, I tried to honor what the story was telling me. So every story is different. In this collection, there's a lot of horror, there's realism, there's sci-fi horror, there's like new weird, there's cosmic horror, there's a little bit of sci-fi, a little bit of fantasy, you name it. But I think it all comes under the speculative umbrella for the most part. And so I think that those threads that run through it hopefully tie it together.
Cool.
Sorry, that was a long answer to your question, but
no, that's fine. I'm like a couple stories into the collection, but now I think I'm going to jump to Ring of Fire to like just read that one now. Cool, it sounds really cool. Another one I wanted to ask was, so going back to the workshop that we were in, where it was like every month it was a new chance to like get a new story like critiqued by Chuck. So it was like every month I was trying to come up with a short story, and I've never written like that, like before or since, but I feel like it was like a whole year of training that has like affected my writing for like the rest of my life now.
Yeah.
So, but like you being on the moderator side, I can't imagine, like, I'm wondering like, wow, like, did that really like supercharge your editing skills, that like, it like added another dimension to your writing, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, what does Stephen King say? You must do two things. You must read and you must write. If you want to be a writer, you have to read, you have to write. So I think reading is crucial. So if I could add a third limb, to a third appendage, I think it is editing. So I think by going through different workshops, were you a part of Write Club?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Holy shit! I forgot. Oh, I forget if we can swear on this or not. Oh, but yeah,
God damn it, swear.
I totally forgot about Write Club. Yeah, I was in that too.
So I think, going through that for a couple of years, it was basically a group of like 25 people or so, and we would get together and everybody would write a book or a collection, whatever, and you would have, if a list of 20 people, if you're number 5, then 3 and 4 and 6 and 7 would be your peers, and you would all write and you'd all evaluate. And so that was a first instance of me really, I think, editing and being held to task and trying to edit other people. I would say getting my MFA helped a bit too, to really be, pushed to getting my work torn apart by professors, and, reading the New Yorker for a couple of years, and just really studying a wide range of stuff. And then, I became a professional editor coming out of my MFA. It basically just started with one of my friends saying, "Hey, would you edit the story? Like, I'll pay you, please, like, help me." And I was like, I guess that's a thing. Okay. And I was like, I didn't feel like I was ready. But, we all started at the bottom, my column at Lit Reactor, and then teaching classes over there and editing. Like, it all started with me just kind of dipping my toe in the water and saying, let me see if I can do this. Like, I think getting my master's degree helped me feel like I have some credentials that I'm okay. I have a master's degree. Like, I'm not a total hack, but, I learned along the way. And I think definitely by editing people's work, it makes me a better writer. Looking at something closely like that, putting together Stephen's collection at Dark House Press, after the People Lights have gone off, reading that closely on a word by word level. Now, that was pretty tight. It's not like they were all published, so I didn't really do a whole lot to it, but just studying it so closely, I really got a sense of how he was pulling off these magic tricks, and on a word level, sentence level, paragraph level, big picture, small picture, all of it together. So I think anytime you can study anybody that closely, that's going to benefit you as a writer. And then the key is to then apply that same scrutiny to your own work, right? So when I write something new, people, I mean, if I'm having a good day, I can write a short story in one day. I can start and write it and edit it and finish it and send it off for deadline. You mentioned, Gus, having all these, I think having deadlines is what really pushes me. So whether it's like a class I paid for where you have a story due every week, and you're like, well, whether you spend 300 or 3,000, I'm like, I'm not going to waste my money, right? Or a deadline for an editor you don't want to let down, who invited you into a project, and you're like, well, I have to give them a good story in 3 months, right? That pushes you to, I think, to be hard on yourself. And so I think, yeah, editing is a great way. There's one number of great craft books out there that help too. Stephen King's On Writing, Jeff Vandermeer's Wonder Book, Donald Moss, M-A-A-S. He's a big super agent. Donald Moss has one called Writing 21st Century Fiction. Chuck has one called Consider This. And then Benjamin Percy has one called Thrill Me. Those are the 5 that I've read and I use the most. That's a really great number of books for like kind of tearing your work apart and studying it. But I think it just takes practice. And then part of what I tell my students is figuring out your voice. So as my voice has changed and evolved, every time I sit down to write, I'm like, okay, what is this going to be? What's the basic concept? What genre do I think it is? First person, third person, male, female, one point of view, split point of view. Like, I make all these decisions and then I just start. And for me, if it's working, I'm feast or famine. So either it's like the muses are speaking and I can generate work. Like my last book, Incarnate, 78,000 words. I wrote it in about 4 weeks. And the one before that, Breaker, I wrote 25 days in kind of a fever dream state of crazy beard and long hair and pulling my hair out. So for me, when it's working, when it's rolling, the idea of writing 3,000 words a day is not ridiculous. But those are these weird gaps in time I had where I'm like, you have 2 weeks, go, right? I wrote the second half of Disintegration, 40,000 words in 1 week. But I've had other projects that take a long time, like that weird Ring of Fire with the monkey thing. Like, I've been chewing on that idea for a couple of years. So there's definitely some projects that I like having the banks back there somewhere. And I definitely have plenty of times where I sit down to write and I fail miserably and I just throw out everything I was trying to do and I get 0 words. So for me, it's either like 0 or 5,000, right? Nothing in between.
Jump in real quick, and then back to you guys.
Sure.
That 100th monkey thing is so fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And what it made me think of is something else that's fascinating, the Mandela effect, and what a good story prompt that is.
Yeah.
I'd like to see some stories with that. Maybe they're out there and I've missed them, but
I will make a note to myself.
Yeah. Anyway, go ahead, Gus. Anything else?
I mean, I was just going to ask, what else is Richard up to, like, reading wise? Like, what is inspiring you now?
Man, I've had a tough time with reading lately. Trying to think what's in my stack right now. Mostly I've been for my advanced creative writing workshop, we do the best horror of the year, then the best American science fiction fantasy, and then best American literary. So those are, I always make sure I read those every year. And then usually I read the best American mystery. So I read a lot of short stories. I read a lot of my students' work. So that's a lot of what I'm reading. But what I just picked up John Taft's Dark Stars. So I haven't
yeah.
read that. I've jumped into that, and then I'm hearing really great things about The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward, which I read her story from my class called The German Hotel, and it blew me away so much that I wanted to buy the book. I've got Mexican Gothic sitting over here.
Needless Street is really good.
Yeah.
I interviewed her about that just a few months ago.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's so worth reading. And then her other book, Sundial, is really, really good too.
Yeah. Well, they made the stack. So they're in the stack. You can see from my classes. So I just have to move it up to the top there. Like I'm writing a little essay for somebody and I'm talking about I think it was neo-noir or something about, and I don't know, anyway, so I wanted to revisit The Road. And so mostly I've been writing and then I think watching more stuff. So I don't know what I've seen recently. The Green Knight was a film I really liked.
That's really funny. I was just thinking of that today and trying to decide if it's good enough to watch or not.
What did you think about it, Richard?
Yeah.
The Green Knight.
I love the director. The film they did before that was one called A Ghost Story, which again, A24, it's a really slow movie, but beautiful, brilliant, haunting. Like I almost bailed on it. It's a short film, but it's one of those films you got to put down your phone and pay attention. Like there's a scene where was it Mara Rooney is eating pie for like 5 minutes. The idea of grief, and it's done so well. But I thought when this guy with a sheet over him, like I'm like, this is gonna be stupid. Like I'm not gonna dig this. Wow. And then there's the last third really has some leaps. I don't want to spoil anything, but coming out of A Ghost Story got me excited to watch A Green Knight. So The Green Knight it's slow. It's visual. It's really striking imagery. I think if you go into it and you're patient, if you know the mythology, it helps so you recognize what you're seeing. But just if you on a big screen, it was stunning. So I just thought it was brilliant. I loved it. I also just saw The Northman. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
It's a little more straightforward, a little more kind of action, a little more Game of Thrones than like The Green Knight. I enjoyed that quite a bit. I like Eggers. I like Ari Aster. I mean, Hereditary is my favorite A24 film of all time, and it's like my favorite horror movie of probably the last 10 years, if not more. People are pretty divisive on like they seem to either love Hereditary and The Witch or Midsummer and The Lighthouse, but they don't like both. So I thought they were all brilliant. The end of The Witch was so nice. I love that kind of, I take it as kind of a hopeful ending, wouldst thou like to live deliciously? She would. She'd like a pat of butter and a pretty dress because you know what Puritanism got her? Nothing. It got her a lot of blame and a lot of loss and death, and so she's going to turn to the dark side.
Right. What a bleak life it was.
Right.
I mean, bleak.
So I mean, such an original take on witches, and I just found it really kind of riveting. At the end, there's this moment where this thing passes. It just like really. There's also a scene in Hereditary, up in the corner. Just all these different moments that like I really a visceral reaction. So. I keep watching all these things. So really A24, anything they do, I keep an eye out for stuff like that. I mean, my top films over there, probably Hereditary, The Witch, Under the Skin, Enemy, A Ghost Story, Ex Machina.
Is Enemy the doppelganger one with Jake Gyllenhaal? Yeah.
And that's a great neo-noir film. I want to add it to my list of like Mulholland Drive and Memento and Blade Runner, right? It's Enemy is such a great film, done so well. So, I mean, for me, I whenever I need to refill the tank, because it's hard to pick up a book for me these days. I got kids going off to college and stuff. Maybe I'll have some more time in the fall. But it's easier for me to sit down and have an hour and a half of a film than it is to pick up a book and really give it the credit it deserves. And so I visually is a quicker way to stimulate my senses. And plus, if I'm doing research, like for my Arctic Horror Sin Eater book, Incarnate, like I watched The Terror, rewatched The Thing. I was watching all kinds of anything with the Arctic and wolves and 28. What's the one about it's kind of set in Barrow, Alaska. The one with is it 28 Days Later?
28 Days Later. I mean, that's the like graphic novel. I don't know if the movie's named that.
Yeah.
30 Days a Night?
30 Days a Night.
30 Days of, 28 Days Later is the zombie movie.
There we go.
Yeah, 30 Days of Night.
So a lot of that stuff, the just really kind of filled my head with images. And then being in Chicago, we have enough winter here that I can kind of tap into that too. But that talking about ideas where you get them and how do you decide what to write, like the idea of a sin eater has always fascinated me. Plus I live in a cold place, so that was a bonus. I could do heavy sensory winter, and then because I'm a maximalist and a bit of a foodie, like I love food. So that the idea of a sin eater sitting down, they have these meals to eat this food where I want the meal to be really intense and then to turn horrible, right? Depending on the state of sin of the person, right? So I knew I was going to have to write those scenes, and I was so excited to do that. So the very first sin eater scene, the protagonist goes to a friend's house to have dinner, and it's this chili. And like I have like 3 or 4 recipes I can just kind of pull out anytime I have a good chili recipe. So every single ingredient that went into there, we're talking. He's like, "Well, what do you put in your chili?" And she's like, "Oh, you mean my award-winning chili?" She's like, "I can't tell you until we're talking. We're getting the garlic and the onions and the tomato and the 3 different beans. Yes, there's beans in there. And then instead of ground beef, she uses like venison and then or deer or caribou, maybe, I forget. And then just all the spices. So it's just your mouth is watering as he's eating this. And then what turns out is that she's betrayed him. Her mother died, and so she snuck him there to have him eat this meal, because the mother, she's worried that usually the better people are, the quicker they move on. And her mother died, but he only does the sin eating when there's this tear in reality, and so he usually eats the sins and then sends these bad things through the tear to battle the things that have been coming through. And if the tear is closed, he has nowhere to send it. So he doesn't eat, he doesn't absolve anybody's sins unless there's a place to put it. Otherwise, it just releases it into the community. So this whole idea of, chicken and the egg story, are things in this rural, remote area bad because of the things that are there, or the things that are there, do they come there because of the bad? Like, are they making it, or are they reacting to it? So he's upset at her for having him eat this meal because the meal turns bad a little bit, because he has nowhere to vomit up and create this monstrosity, because the tear is closed. And so when he goes to create this, it's kind of funny. Instead of this like really mythic beast that comes out, because you don't want to send a puppy dog through a tear to battle this kaiju, right? You need something formidable. You need a dinosaur. You need a monster, right? So he vomits up. It's like this little pink rabbit with like these little horns and his red eyes. And it's just, so obviously grandma wasn't pure, but this isn't, some monstrosity. So it's just, but that's the kind of thing that I love doing. Was I knew I try to create these spaces where I can play in them a bit and then lean into my strengths.
By the way, that was Melissa before. Hey, Melissa.
Yeah. Hi, Melissa. Thank you. Good question.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I just snuck in. Sorry.
No worries. It's all good.
If you like Cindy, and I got one more question for you.
Yep.
And then we can talk about some other things. But if you like the Sin Eater type of story, you should pick up a novella that I published, written by Raven Dag Morgan. It's called the Dog. Sorry, my mouth's really dry.
Okay.
Excuse me. It's called The Dog, and I think we've got it on Kindle Unlimited. I can't remember.
What's the name of the author again?
Also in print. Raven Dag Morgan. That's DAEGMORGAN.
Where were you 6 months ago?
We were there.
Yeah, I know. I tried.
The challenges of a small press. You try to reach people, but you can't always. But okay, so you were asked in another interview, and this was very sad and very interesting. What got you into writing horror? And you named a couple things, and then Stephen King, other authors, etc. And then you also said there was a moment when I was hiking in downtown St. Louis where I saw a man parachute out of a plane. And why don't you go ahead and finish that instead of me?
Yeah.
It's very sad and very
pretty intense.
strange.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all witness death. We all, in different ways, shapes and forms. And maybe for some of us, it's just going to your first grandfather's, funeral. And you see a dead body in a casket. But
Right.
I was a young Boy Scout hiking in St. Louis, and people down by the St. Louis Arch, and planes would fly over the arch all the time, but they outlawed it. And so we're walking. I was like, oh, look, somebody jumped out of a plane, right? And I'm like, they're gonna land on the arch, I was on 10 or 12 or something. And so this guy's floating down, and then sure enough, he lands on the arch. And it's totally illegal, not supposed to do this stuff, right? And then we're watching, and then we look up and we could see him like sliding down the leg of the arch.
Oh my God.
And so one of my leaders, who was like ex-FBI or something, he's like, "Come on, kids, let's get up the hill. We're gonna break his fall." I'm like, all we would have doing is killing 4 Boy Scouts. But you know, we followed him
Break his
anyway.
fall?
Yeah.
What?
So we ran up the stairs. There's like, I don't know, 100 stairs from the Mississippi River up to like the arch. And needless to say, we didn't get there in time. Not that we could have done anything.
Well,
That was,
imagine that you did.
right.
How would you like to have that conversation with the parents?
Right.
You know what? I thought we'd break his fall. And,
You put your hands up.
but
I got you, buddy.
It was still a good idea.
No.
Yeah.
So I was one of the people that got over the top of the stairs in time to see him hit, and he bounced like 10 feet in the air and then came back down. Luckily, he was wearing this jumpsuit that kept most of him intact. But what it turns out was happening was that his wife and his friends were there filming this, and that he planned to jump and land on the arch, and then he was going to jump off away from it into the gap, then pull his reserve, and then just float down. It would have been easy. But the minute he landed, there was this like crosswind, and it pushed him over the leg, and the metal from the suit and everything like kept him stuck to the metal of the arch, so he couldn't get away from it to like open his reserve. So when he pulled his reserve, he just got tangled up in the rest of it. So he plummeted to his death.
You
And so
imagine
then,
that moment when he's at the top and he starts sliding down. You know, my palms are sweating thinking of that.
yeah, and you keep thinking, trying to get away from it. At what point you're like, oh shit, and you pull your reserve and you're like, oh, well, this is a bad idea.
Yeah.
And so his wife is holding his head and like crying, whatever family. So his face was basically turned inside out. It was pretty gnarly. But the visual that I always have is that there was a sheen of blood as wide as the leg of the arch, which is pretty wide. And I'd never seen so much blood in my entire life. And I'm glad that he was contained by the suit, that he wasn't just like body parts everywhere.
Yeah.
But that was just, I mean, it's like the moment in The Shining, right? Where the elevator doors open, but there's just this thin sheen of blood. Like I didn't think the human body could hold that much blood. And so I often wonder to myself, seeing that at a young age, is that one of those things that like scars you for life that you can't ever shake? And I wonder if that's what drove me to write dark stories. Although I will say a lot more of my stories have hope. There's more positive. The horror doesn't always win, but I guess for me, people always ask me like, why do you write horror stories? Why do you write these dark stories? Is, you know, it's to make it through the other side, to show that we can survive. And often it is to, you know, to end the evil. But same reason, you know, that you ride a roller coaster, like you don't really want to die. You just want to, you know, get close to it, you know, because there's a thrill there, and you want to see something you haven't seen before, and you want to get scared, but you don't really want to, like, I don't really want to wrestle a bear.
Catriona said something to me. Catriona Ward said something to me in the Needless Street interview,
Yep.
I think it was. So I interviewed her about Sundial as well. And she said, was talking about the fight or flight thing.
Right.
But she said, you can fight a horror when or whatever's coming, you can run away from it, or you can make friends with it. And that's what says that horror is. And writing horror and reading horror is making friends with it, in other words. So
yeah,
I thought it was interesting. I'd never heard it phrased quite that way before.
Well, and I think that's the end of the witch, right? You know, she would like to live deliciously. She's going to go dance naked around a fire with the other witches, right? But I think it's a matter of
no Wi-Fi though.
Yeah, right. That sometimes the horror doesn't care what you want, right? So you got to be careful. That, like in my Arctic horror book, you know, you be careful what you try and friend out there in the woods or when you cross through to the desert, because it's not going to want to friend you. It's going to just eat you. You know, like it doesn't really care. Nature can be brutal. And that was one of the things that I explored in that book as well. Is, you know, there are things out there, and all they need to do is eat. Like you can't bargain with them. You can't reason with them. You can't, you know, can't change their mind.
Actually, it's interesting. This kind of parallels something.
Excuse me. Thanks for being here, Gus.
Yeah, thanks, Gus.
Thank you.
Great seeing you, buddy.
Hi, Gus.
Good
to see you, number one. Take it easy, Richard.
Thanks.
See you.
Right.
Good to see you, buddy.
Who was the guy who wrote Cryptonomicon? Neil Stevenson. In one little bit, like all of his books were filled with these little asides that are just so brilliant. But he was talking about the rainforest jungle in the Pacific, like in the Philippines or whatever. And he says, in this jungle, the whole premise is that everything is trying to eat everything else and trying to kill each other. And the minute you set foot in the jungle, you've signed on for the whole proposition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
So,
And so,
yeah.
and so I think for me, what I try and do is sometimes I'll lean into that, and sometimes the evil will win. And other times I want to make the trip and the journey worth it, but to come out the other side, maybe a bit scathed, maybe a bit damaged, a little bit broken, but it's relatively intact, and to see if you can survive. I think some of the most terrifying horror stories are the ones where you get out, but you're not really intact. Stephen Graham Jones' story, Father, Son, Holy Rabbit, the idea of a father doing something to save his son's life, but the consequences, not realizing that he will break his son, and that the future that is held for him is pretty damaged and broken and bleak. But we do these things anyway, right? So I think there's a lot of room in horror, I think, to play around and explore.
Reminds me too of I forget the name of the movie. What's the movie where it's got Nicolas Cage and Joaquin Phoenix? It's about 10 or 15 years ago at least, and it's about snuff films in that world. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
8mm.
8mm, yeah. What a bleak film. But what you just said reminded me of that at the end, Nicolas Cage is not unscathed. He's in his yard raking his leaves, just desperately wanting to just do something normal.
Yeah, and I think sometimes horror can be a cautionary tale. Sometimes it can be cathartic to go through it and be like, "Ooh, I'm glad." Quite often I'll go through something and I'll just go hug my wife and kids, right? And be like, "Okay, we're okay." So I think
the nice
people
thing about a nightmare is when you wake up and you're like, "Oh, everything's good."
Yeah, so I think people come to horror for a lot of different reasons. It's not just like my tolerance for gore has changed over the years. I don't enjoy it as much anymore. I don't tolerate. I don't put as much of my work, evolving out of neo-noir into more speculative stuff, because I don't think it's necessary. Not that I don't go there. I do go there sometimes, but it has to really be earned. There are very few places I won't go anymore, but there are a few that I won't go anymore. But it has to be earned. It's crucial to the story, and it has to be.
I'm with you on that very much.
Yeah. So that if people are going to go through that, like in Ring of Fire, I knew that the character had to be a very bad person, because he's a catalyst for change. So I had to keep struggling with, how do I show that what he's done? How do I get you to like him and care for him, and then show you the thing and still have you not like eject from the story, right? So I would write that scene, and then I would back it up, and then I'd rewrite it, and then I'd back it up, and I'd rewrite it again, and then I'd see, well, what scene, what did I put before it? What do I put after it? How do I buffer it? Because I don't want anybody to come to my work and eject. I don't want them to bail and go, nope, I'm out. So I have to push up right to the edge and then let it come back down, which is a tough thing to do. It's also subjective, right?
You've definitely done that. Guys, anyone listening, watching, Spontaneous Human Combustion by Richard Thomas. Really, I loved this collection.
Thank you.
These are some great short stories. So please pick it up. It came out in February, right?
Yep, 2/22/22. And hopefully there's a little something there for everybody. Short, long, Lovecraftian, realism, sci-fi, horror. There's a lot of weird stuff. I have a second person Lovecraft, email from hell kind of story, and there's a lot of weird stuff in there. But I try to write on a couple of different levels, body, mind, and soul, so that you can be entertained by it, and that could be enough. Or if you want to go deeper, you can have emotion and care. And then the third level is the intellect, that some sort of concept is presented that you can chew on and stay with you long after the story is done. So hope you can enjoy it on a base level if you want. And hopefully, if I tick off all your boxes of what scares you and freaks you out and works for you, then hopefully I'll have an emotional connection with you, and then something intellectual that you could think about as well.
I just looked it up. It's also on Audible, guys.
Yes, it is.
So if you're an Audible person like I am, you can get it there too.
Awesome.
So yeah, pick up that book, Spontaneous Human Combustion. And Rick, you said you're going to hang out with us for a few minutes, right?
Sure. Yeah.
All right.
Happy
awesome. So Melissa's joined us. DeBronzo's here. I don't know how I feel about that, but
You invited him.
I guess I did, didn't I?
I guess you could probably kick him out if you wanted, right? No,
nah, that's okay.
It's your Zoom.
I'll start talking about Mothman's ass again.
Oh my
I
gosh.
saw that in real life. I really saw Mothman's ass. Like, I was there in West Virginia. It is just like the picture, but more shiny in person.
Did you touch it?
Micah Castle.
No, but I was because I was posing for a picture. I'm like, what? Whoa, like that is very the backside.
Okay, now wait. Okay, so Melissa, there's this, I don't know if this is true, but I think it may be true. There's a statue of the Navy's mascot on the grounds of Annapolis, Bill the Goat. Okay. Well, so one of the things, at least when it was an all-male institution, was they'd tell a cadet, Bill the Goat's balls. And they'd go run and touch Bill the Goat's balls and then run back. And over the years, the whole statue is dull, except the testicles are shiny because it's been rubbed by so many cadets over the years. So what I'm asking you about this relating to Mothman and why the rear end is shiny, I'm just wondering, is it shinier than the rest of the statue?
I do feel like, no, it was not it was like winter when we went. There wasn't a lot of people. I was not in line to hang out with the Mothman, but I do feel like that probably, I would not be surprised.
So Micah Castle the other day on Twitter, he writes, he's in a Twitter thread, and he goes, unrelated, but the latest Lovecraft eZine podcast with Laurel Hightower discussed Mothman's ass, and I'm like, okay. So I just retweeted it and wrote, we try to tackle the important topics on my podcast.
Very important. Mothman is thick.
Yep.
So is it just well sculpted, or is it at the right height for pictures that people just happen
all
to?
of the above, like everything. And plus, like, because you're like, you see the front of the Mothman, then you go around and you're like, whoa, like
that's America's ass.
I wasn't expecting all that. Because like, I don't know who, like, what, but the wings are like up a little higher, so it's just like, it's right there.
Party in the back.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like Tarantino and all the feet in his movies, right? The sculptor's like,
You're like, ooh.
yeah.
So who's watching Stranger Things?
Just
It's
finished.
really good. It's good this season.
It is.
I did not watch 2 or 3. Like I couldn't get into the season 2. I just didn't watch season 3 at all. And like this season, I'm like, oh, I like it. Silly.
Did you finish the last episode yet, Mike?
No, I haven't finished the next last episode yet either.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that a lot happens.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I'll do it.
And
But
they
it's
do-
just so, there's a lot of bloat with 11's arc,
Yeah.
But they do explain, even though it's not ending till July, they do explain everything. You got most of your questions answered.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that 11 was a bit passive in the first couple episodes. It was really kind of in the background, but we're starting to get into her story now. So the end of the first part. So I would say hang in there, in for a penny, in for a pound, and then reserve your judgment until we finish the July part. But it has some interesting stuff. I love the D&D angle. That's a really interesting. I played D&D back in the 80s, so it's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I love that. That Hellfire Club is a cult.
Yeah,
and I'm like, oh,
totally. The satanic panic.
Danielle was in the room. My wife was in the room. She's like, what? And I'm like, it's the 80s.
Yeah.
Right. So there's some layers in there, but get to the end of this section, then we'll see how you feel. I felt like they probably could have shown the flashbacks a little bit less. It was done it quite a few times, but
yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I only have I asked because I'm old and I only have a limited amount of hours left in my life. So
I hear you.
All right, so I'll finish watching Stranger Things.
Yeah, Stephen
guys are
King even
amazing.
posted on his Twitter, I guess, that he really liked it, but he complained about it not being all released all at once. And the
Oh, you did,
Stranger,
did he?
yeah, and the Stranger Things directors, the brothers answered back. They said, "Sorry, Uncle Stevie, episode 8 and 9 aren't done yet." But I thought that was great. But they're like, "I'm glad you liked our Carrie reference or whatever." So I thought that was pretty neat exchange.
Yeah, I didn't see it, but that sounds pretty cool. So all right, I'll do that since you guys are making me.
Better that than some of the other ones.
Yeah. So if you're a Patreon, it only costs $5 a month to join. Here's what you're going to experience on Thursday. And of course, if you can't watch it live, it's like this show. You can watch it later or listen to it later. But we're going to do a Patreon podcast about Michael Shea.
Who's going to do that one, Mike?
I think Laird suggested it to me. And then I said, okay, well, who should we have on this? He gave me a couple suggestions. And Linda Shea gave me some suggestions too. So here's who's going to be on that. Henrik Moeller, Cody Goodfellow, Mark Laidlaw. I think Linda's going to be there. Linda Shea, his wife. John Langan, Laird Barron, and Sam Hamm. And
Oh, that's a great panel for that.
yeah. I'll probably be mostly silent.
If you haven't read Mr. Camiharm, which was a novel he wrote.
Looking at it right now. Yeah.
He wrote that in the 1980s, and it was just released last year. I have heard a rumor. I think there's another book similarly that was written before he died and was sitting unpublished for a long time that's due to come out.
Payman says he's late to the party. You're forgiven if you stop beating me in chess, man.
I mean, John and Laird, that's awesome. Laird, I guess so. Like when I was mentioning the New Black earlier, Laird wrote the introduction for it, and like I should have had him. I should have had a story from him, but somehow it fell through the cracks. So, but him writing the introduction, talking about neo noir, brilliant. Like it was just, I love listening to him talk about it, and he nailed it. So, I love what Laird's doing, and John Langan too. So, two amazing writers.
Melissa and Bridget, have you guys read Michael Shea? Some or
I've not.
anything? Okay. Well, because it occurs to me. Yeah, well, it just occurs to me that besides Linda, this is all male podcast, and I don't want that. So, I'll see what I can do.
So thoughtful of you.
Well, you can't always.
Well, you also have to consider, Mike, just Mike Shea, the era he was productive in, and most of his correspondence professionally ended up being male.
Yeah,
it'd be different if he was writing now, Yeah. But you're talking more than 20 years ago is when he was in his real peak.
Well, I try, like that new horror stories playlist I've got on the Lovecraft Teasing YouTube page. I just put down the third one, Sit the Dead by Jeffrey Ford, read by John Paget. By the way, made me feel so great. Jeff loved it. What a good job John did in the presentation and everything. But that's free for everybody. That's not a Patreon thing. The Patreon podcast on Thursday is a Patreon thing. But you get a lot for $5 a month. That's all. I'll leave it at that. Just go to Lovecraft Teasing Patreon.com or Google Lovecraft Teasing Patreon. Well, yeah, we're going to do that Michael Shea podcast this Thursday at 9 Eastern at the usual time. And but what I was saying about the playlist is I've got a story coming up, several actually, by female writers. But I wrote on the third one, and I said I realized that we had a delay. The third one was supposed to be by a woman writer. I won't say who. I'll surprise you guys. But it's coming up next, so it'll be the fourth one. So I mean, you can't always, but I do try, and I hope it comes out all right. Let's see. Oh, I saw Alan Baxter's episode of Love, Death, Robots. Have you guys seen that yet?
Yeah.
No, I haven't. I had someone recommend that to me. I still have to watch it.
It's in the third season, and I say that as a person who realized a month ago that there was a series called Love, Death, Robots. So, but it's in the third season. It's called In Vaulted Halls Entombed, I think, right?
Something like that. I can never remember the title.
Bolts and Tombs.
Okay, I haven't watched that one yet.
It's good.
Written by Alan Baxter, and then Philip Gillott wrote the screenplay. So it was pretty great.
You should also watch the Tall Grass by Joel Lansdale from season 2.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm going to tackle quite a few more of these.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of the second season right now, so I watched the first one, and Alan's great. I love Alan. I love his work, so I'll look forward to it.
Yeah, I didn't realize until just now. Alan's a Patreon and Philip's a Patreon, so be cool like Philip Gillott. Yeah. All right, what else do we want to talk about? Yeah, DeBronzo, to your idea, I asked people what their favorite Lovecraft story was, which I don't do very much of, but mine is probably, well, it's the Night Ocean, but that's more of a collaboration, and R.J. Barlow probably did most of it. But Shadow Out of Time is probably mine, I would say. So what's yours, since you said we should ask this on air?
You know what? It kind of, I'm gonna take the mythos stories
Mhm.
out of it, because
Right.
somebody actually wrote. I went through the post, and it's like it depends on the day. So
That's true. Are you talking about on the big Facebook page?
yeah. I
Oh
mean,
my
it could be
God, there's
called.
a lot of responses. Jesus.
Yeah, a lot of people love At the Mountains of Madness, rightfully
Yeah.
so. The mythos stories, I really, love them, but it depends. But like my go-to stories when I like pick up Dagon and other macabre tales, I used to go for the ones that are like the unnameable or the Lurking Fear. That was the first one I ever read.
Mhm.
And I kind of like those. They're more my go-to stories. And I like those that are not like, it's not the mythology, it's just its own thing. So
Yeah.
What about Pickman's model?
Yes,
I
that's
love-
my favorite.
yeah, I mean
Big
stuff. It's like
surprise.
yeah,
I mean that in the best way, because you're an artist
yeah.
and a musician. So
Yeah. So of course I love Music of Eric Zahn.
Yeah.
oh
But
my
actually, Whisper in the Darkness is way up there for me. too.
the guys
Yeah.
at the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society let me have a copy of digital copy of Music of Arizona, and I shared it with the Patreons like a year ago. It always adds a different dimension to a story when you listen to it from a great
True.
narrator. So anything else, Mike?
You know what? It's like I really like most of the body of his work. There's some that I don't. But like stuff like The Shunned House, they're not great stories. I mean, they're good. They're not as accomplished as other ones, but I like those type of tales, like, or the Picture in the House, Pickman's Model, The Festival. I mean, I know I'm like basically going through like the index, but it's just, it's really, I haven't reread Lovecraft in a long time. I used to do it like every year. Maybe not everything, but like pick up one of the volumes. Haven't done it in a while. So, if you asked me like a month from now after I read it, they could probably change. But I'd probably go with those two short stories because they're always kind of like Unnameable. I always liked because it reminded me, I live in Jersey, so Jersey Devil. And the way it starts off is, that you're talking about lore and about who lived in the house. And I was like, it always reminded me of that type of, your local mythology type thing.
Yeah. Rick, what about you?
I like Pickman's model.
Okay.
His mythos stories. I think I have a warm spot for Horror of the Dark.
Bridget, anything besides Pickman's that you want to mention?
Well, I just have
Well,
to,
Eric's on, like you said.
yeah, I have to call out my husband a little bit because today we were talking about this, and he's not he doesn't read a lot, period. He's, just not into reading much. And so I said, well, you need to actually listen to this story from Lovecraft. I've only been a part of this podcast for how long, right? So I was like, okay, I'm going to read you The Cats of Ulthar. So I read it to him and he just sat there and he's like, wow. And then he goes, so wait, the little boy's cat didn't come back?
No.
And I just laughed because that's the thing that he grasped onto. It was awesome.
You have cats?
Yes.
Matt and Melissa, what about you?
Melissa?
Ooh, I honestly am trying to think because I have probably not read any Lovecraft. Like, I mean, I used to, like, I was a teenager or like 20s.
Yeah, I know. Like a lot of people.
It's hard because I'm like, would this stuff, like, I can say like what my favorites were, but I'm like, would they still be my favorites? Like, I feel like maybe I need to do a reread. And there's like, A lot of them. I mean, I
A lot of
really
people read
like
cosmic
dream.
horror. They read the as written by other authors. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I really liked Dreams in the Witch House just because I just love that story. And I actually, during that time, I lived that I was reading, I was like, you know, in my like early 20s, lived in this old house. It was like some old house that was like broken down into apartments. And we lived in this room in the near the attic that had all these like weird angles. And I always
Oh,
felt like, I'm like,
cool.
I live in the witch house. I'm like, I hope Brown Jenkins doesn't come and you know, attack me. But it's just like a really cool story. And I honestly also love like Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. Like I know it's like not a big, but I just thought it was such a neat kind of like fantasy world that he had. So yeah, but again, it's like there's a lot. I could just start like listing, like to say one, it just I couldn't really just pick one that is like my favorite because it is like what day is it? And honestly, I feel like I would have to reread now, like because I'm sure it's like I'm a, you know, like reading something now that I haven't read in like a very long time. It would be like a whole different perspective. So
Yeah, that's definitely true.
yeah.
Matt and Richard, what about you guys?
So for me, I've been reading these stories for 50 years now. And the truth is, my favorites evolved over the years. And now I've not actually read real Lovecraft stories in such a long time because I already knew them all so well. So I think if I'd say, as far as the craft goes, The Color Out of Space is his best written story, most original, striking, unusual, weird, completely unhuman. I thought that's really stands alone. But the last time I sat down and picked out a book and I'm going to read some Lovecraft, it was The Outsider. And that's still the one that stays with me as much as I like The Cats of Ulthar, as much as I like The Call of Cthulhu. It's the Outsider would be the one that I would sit down to read.
That was the first one I ever like read, and as like a very like misanthropic teenager, it really like I really felt that. I'm like, oh yes, he understands what it's like to be an outsider, you know. But it has a lot of emotion. I mean, it's a good story.
Okay, so then if I can just comment on the old alt.horror Cthulhu, roughly before the year 2000, they did a reread of Lovecraft. And the story this week is this. And then they would have an open thread where people would discuss it. So then that was started again and fell apart after 5, 6, 7 books around 2003, 4. And then if you know Ken Hite, he did a blog from like 2007 to 8 or so where he discussed each Lovecraft story on his blog. And the guy's, he's really an amazing scholar, brilliant and quite witty. And this is what turned into his book, Tour to Lovecraft. But if there was sufficient interest amongst the readership, we potentially could start this on the eZine main page, or like the Lovecraft reread, where we pick a story every 2 weeks, you post it and say, okay, this is just an open thread to say what you think about the story. You know, you could comment about the artistic aspects or the story plots or anything like that. But to make that work, you have to have a sufficient cadre of interested readers that they'll actually comment.
Well, DeBronzo can tell you that what is there, several hundred comments on just what's your favorite Lovecraft story?
Last I checked, it was like 248 comments, but that was like maybe a few hours after you posted it.
Yeah, so
I don't know what it's up to now.
So this is just something, if you wanted, this would be something you could say, okay, we're going to say, do them in chronological order, or we're going to do them in the order that they appear in the U.S. Library of Fiction book or something like that. And it would just be a chance to have people say what they thought about the story, what they liked about it, what didn't work for them. You know, like reading now The Rats and the Walls, it's almost unbearable for me because of, I don't know if I read a redacted story originally, the racist comments. You know, it's just, it's hard to stomach. It's hard to read the horror at Red Hook for me now.
Yeah.
You know, it took me a long time when I was a boy, when I started reading as a boy. Now it took me a long time to realize, hey, you know what? My hero's racist. Then it took me a longer time to realize, you know what? He's really a racist. And then it took an even longer time before I was willing to acknowledge that, you know what? This could be reflected in his fiction. You know, so it's like, I'm really glad that this is public domain and we have so many people of different viewpoints and everything writing about it now, taking it in wonderful new directions. So I'd much rather read, say, the latest Victor LaValle story, or I'd rather read Caitlin Kiernan's take on something because she's so fabulous. It's like, so I got lots of choices where
that's the point.
What for me, the problematic aspects of him, they've taken the best of him and they've gone off on tangents with it. And that's where I go now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
You want to chime in, Richard?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. You guys have named so many, but yeah, the Victor LaValle story, the one set on a train. I can't think of I just did that for one of my classes. That was it Coming Up from the Plantation? Something, I forget the name of it, but that was
I know what you're talking about. I don't remember the title either, but
yeah, I really am more of a fan of Lovecraftian fiction with what's happening now, but to see what people are doing with it, and Victor's story is pretty amazing. I mean, you know, at the Mountains of Madness, you know, there's so many great stories. You guys are naming them all, but I think I was going to ask you too about adaptations, because I recently reread that as well as watched The Thing, because I was looking at Arctic stuff, right? So I was looking at Arctic horror and kind of cosmic horror stuff, and so I also recently watched Color Out of Space. How do you feel about the recent adaptations of Lovecraft's work? Does it work for you still? Like, I thought Color Out of Space was pretty cool. We were just talking about Nick Cage earlier, right? And anytime there's a movie where someone's chopping carrots, it's definitely going to bother me, because I'm like, if you
seriously,
right? I'm like,
there's been like 10 of them in the last year. No more with
please, come on.
So certain things about that, I thought the director did incredibly well, like the soundscape.
Yeah.
And using all the subsonics to make you uneasy. The depiction of the people mushing together and the way he tried to depict the color. This is great, okay? But some of the changes, like adding all the Wiccan stuff into it and the daughter mutilating herself, that just, I didn't mind it as part of the spectacle, but it didn't really serve the story in my view.
What was it?
So I think it's a very enjoyable film, but if you want a more true adaptation, although it's not as big budget a film, you would watch Dia Farba.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
you know. So that was just, I did enjoy that movie. There are lots of great things about it. Nicolas Cage did a great job playing Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, how the fuck do you milk an alpaca? I don't know. But I thought, and okay, where in the book is she going to chop off her fingers chopping carrots? Okay, fine. And then are they going to reattach them and she can sit down and play Mozart or something? I'm sure.
Oh my gosh.
It's like, so, but it is a terrific movie. I don't know if it's.
Yeah. But the visuals were fun. Yeah, because I was looking for something kind of similar to the Aurora Borealis, and I thought there might be some cool stuff in there. So between that and At the Mouth of Madness and The Thing and stuff, I thought those were all pretty good visuals. If you want a different Nick Cage movie, check out The Pig.
That's really good.
Totally different vibe. Not at all what I thought was going to be. Really kind of a beautiful, touching, kind of haunting movie. I really enjoyed it. Kind of
a Arctic stuff a minute ago too. There's a story you can read for free on my site, lovecraftezine.com, and it's called The Crevasse, whatever, by Dale Bailey and Nathan Ballingrud.
Nice.
They allowed me to reprint that, some years back, and it's set in the Arctic. So,
nice.
Yeah, really good story. One of my
isn't that in his one of his collections?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
It's
I
been
think I read
published in
it.
a few collections.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I first discovered it in Ellen Datlow's, I forget the name of it. It was a Lovecraft anthology.
I think it's in North American Lake Monsters too.
Yeah, I
have
just
to
think
look.
there's a really nice long lineage of weird fiction, science fiction set in the Arctic, going back to Jules Verne, then Poe, then Lovecraft, and then was it John W. Campbell with Who Goes There? There's a long, proud lineage of weird Arctic horror because the environment is so merciless. So I think it's a really rich place to play in. That's like the one of the most horrific things about watching The Terror was just what the cold was doing to everybody.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the wife of the captain, I think it was, where she said, I went out onto our outside of our door in the winter here, and I couldn't make it past 10 minutes, and they're in it all the time. You know,
Yeah.
really.
That was a cool moment. Yeah.
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 So as you guys know, every week I do every podcast I do a TBR to add to everybody's TBR. And the theme this week is superheroes, because I started rereading, I haven't read it in years, Austin Grossman's Soon I Will Be Invincible. And it's a really, really great read. Then I've got Devil's Cape by Rob Rogers. You guys can go on Amazon and read them. And I do, in the show notes, I've got the links. And we go into DC, Enemies and Allies by Kevin J. Anderson. That's Batman and Superman set in the 50s. And they meet together for the first time in the 50s. Playing for Keeps by Mur Lafferty. Speaking of different settings, It's Superman is, I forgot to put the author's name in there. But that's Superman set in the Great Depression. Or right at the end of the Great Depression. Batman Dead White by John Shirley. In this one, it's a modern day one, and Batman's been out. He's in like his second year. It's a really good one. And probably my favorite, at least of Batman novels, is not that there's a lot, there's not, but Batman Fear Itself by Michael Reeves, which I made DeBronzo read.
It's sitting on the shelf. I haven't got to yet.
What?
It's on it's a long TBR list.
I don't understand what you're saying to me right now.
Yeah.
Mike, have you ever read Gladiator by Philip Riley?
No, that doesn't ring a bell.
That was written in around 1931. And it was sort of a superhero novel where a scientist experiments on the sun and essentially turns him into Wolverine. And that he has healing powers and super strength and whatever. And it's a very realistic novel of how Superman would survive in the modern 20th century.
What's the name of that again?
Gladiator by Philip Wylie.
Okay,
Riley.
I got it pulled up. Oh, that sounds really interesting, Rick. And some of the ones I've mentioned. Is this like a magazine?
No, it was a novel. Maybe the comic book adaptation.
Planet Monk Pulps Book 15, it says. So, yeah. Anyway, to your point, several of the ones in here are not DC, like the story you just mentioned, are not DC or Marvel, but they're really good stories. Pete would like this. Here's the first chapter of, not the first chapter, first couple paragraphs of Soon I Will Be Invincible. This morning on planet Earth, there are 1,686 enhanced, gifted, or otherwise superpowered persons. Of these, 126 are civilians, 38 are kept in research facilities funded by the Department of Defense or foreign equivalents, 226 are aquatic, confined to the oceans. 29 are strictly localized. Trees, great finks, things like that. 3 are dogs. 25 are microscopic, including the infinitesimal 7. 4 are cats, 1 is a bird. 6 are made of gas. 1 is a mobile electrical effect, more of a weather pattern than a person. 77 are alien visitors. 38 are missing. And here's the little line that Pete would really like. 41 are off continuity, permanent immigrants to Earth's alternate realities and branching time streams. Remember, he's talked several times about the story he would write like that. So, but Pete's sick, so he wasn't here today. So.
Have you checked out The Boys yet, Mike?
Oh yeah, I already watched the first 3 of the latest season. I think it was 3, right?
Yeah.
So,
pretty interesting.
Yeah, so I guess there's a pill that can make you.
They went a little too crazy with the sexual angle in the opening.
Well, yeah, they go a little too crazy a lot of the time. Yeah, I guess there's a pill that can make you into Homelander basically for 24 hours.
Nice.
So yeah, no, I like The Boys a lot. So, did I miss anything, guys? Anything else you want to talk about? No.
You want me to talk about Monster Palooza?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. Because your husband, is your husband alive? Because I see he was with.
He is alive. Yes.
Okay. Right.
So, yeah, Monster Palooza is a big convention in Pasadena, California. And the focus is on the special effects, makeup, mask part of horror.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been a huge fan of Face Off for years too. And so all the, big people from Face Off were there. And it was pretty surreal to just be walking around the corner and being like, oh yeah, there's V. Neal's makeup school. And oh, there's V. Neal doing makeup on a lady right there. Oh, that's Glenn Hedrick that just walked by. Pretty freaking amazing. And then Mike and I are walking around the show floor, and there was kind of a little bottleneck, and I'm thinking, okay, what's going on here? And of course I'm kind of short. And then I finally see I get around. I was like, oh, because Greg Nicotero is right there. It was really cool. Lots of really awesome artists and vendors and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, they had celebrities there. They had the whole cast of Scream, the original Scream there.
Wow.
Yeah, which was pretty neat. So that was pretty cool to walk by and be like, well, there's Nev Campbell, gorgeous as ever. And then they had a bunch of other people. Doug Bradley, of course, from the Hellraiser series was there. Then, obviously I can't remember everyone because it was just amazing. But yes, so my husband, huge Friday the 13th fan, and Kane Hodder was there. So earlier in the day, we're just walking around and peeking at people like, oh, yep, there he is, or there she is at the table. But we happened to see Greg Nicotero walk up and give Kane Hodder a hug. And it was just such a cool, genuine moment to catch. Just, hey, how's it going? Haven't seen you for a while. That was really neat. And then later on, we went and got in line, to get an autograph and talk with Kane Hodder and get a selfie. And so my husband and I told him, hey, we saw your documentary too, and it was really great, really inspiring. And Mike was like, I hear there's like some choke out thing that you do sometimes for pictures. And he said, well, I used to actually choke people, like choke them, like blood choke. So not literally like choking people, but, enough that they were like, ooh, getting dizzy and stuff. And he said that one guy sued him for damage or something. And so he can't choke people anymore. But he's like, but I can kind of do this. And so he put my husband in a headlock for the picture, which was super cool. Because he, like I said, he was a big fan of Friday the 13th since he was a kid. And he said that Jason was one of the things that literally scared him when he was young. And so meeting Kane Hodder in person, and he's just the most amazing, sweet person. And then getting a headlock from him. He was super happy. So for the record, he did not choke anybody out. He did not break the law because he's not allowed to do that anymore. But yeah, he just did a very ginger headlock in the photo, and it was really cool. It was a cool
So that's a really cool picture. You guys posted it on Facebook, or you did, but
yeah.
so a fan actually asked him to do this to them, and when he did, they sued him.
Yeah, apparently.
Welcome
Yeah.
to America.
Yep. But I have some of the art I got. Do you guys want to see?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes.
sure.
Yeah.
So firstly,
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
Firstly, I didn't buy from this guy, but I have to say his name because his stuff was really awesome. And his account is called Disjointed Joy. And he did some really creepy drawings that almost looked like monsters were posing. And it definitely gave me a Pigman's model kind of vibe.
Awesome.
But I just didn't have anywhere in my house right now because, of course, we're moving soon. That I was like, I don't know where I could put these because it would genuinely freak people out, even though I love them.
Sorry, wait, Bridget. That has nothing to do with anything when you pick something up. You don't have to have a place to put it.
That's true. That's true.
You find a place, by God.
I was definitely tempted, but anyway, I just wanted to plug his art because it's really great.
Disjointedjoy.com.
Disjointed Joy, yeah. I got a couple things from Mallory Hart Art, rainbow skulls.
Wow.
Nice.
That's really neat.
Wow.
And if you go to their Instagram, you can see each one of those getting painted. So it was cool to get them all in one. And then, of course, Mike had to have this one, the three-eyed cat. But also by them. Let's see. Oh, here's the autograph we got from Kane Hodder.
Nice.
Oh, awesome.
That's really
Sweet.
nice.
Yeah, that was really fun.
Richard, if you're confused, there are 3 mics associated.
Yes, there's
Mike.
the Mike times 3.
Mike Renmark, her husband, Mike DeBronzo here, and Mike Davis.
Yes.
On the other hand, if you meet someone from the eZine podcast and you just call them Mike, it's a pretty good
Right.
chance.
Yeah,
of
you're
that.
good.
Good default. Yeah.
Mike.
Someone will answer.
Yes. So these ones are by Braden Duncan, and did all these like funny like cat horror mashups. So you got like Pinhead Cat. Yes, we love cats. We got It Cat.
Nice.
I just saw your comment about Mike Cat. Oreo is
Nah.
conked out.
And then of course, yes, and then Cat Thulu.
Nice.
Oh, that's
I love
nice.
that.
Nice.
Yeah, it was really funny. And then lastly, I got to meet Sarah Richard, who did this really cool Gene Wilder.
Wow.
Oh,
Nice.
Wow.
Very cool.
And I got this book of hers, which she wrote during the pandemic, and it's called The Dead Handbook: Stories from Gravesend Cemetery.
Cool.
And this is all digital art that she did in here, and it's just awesome. Like, I'm trying to get inside.
Oh my
There we go.
gosh.
And she did like all these weird little kind of cryptic old style stories
Oh my
about
God. I'm
different
gonna have to
characters.
save up for this.
What's the name of the book?
It's called The Dead Handbook.
That's really beautiful.
Isn't it awesome? And of course, because I got it at the convention, she signed it and did a little doodle in there for me, which is
Oh, nice.
really cool. So yeah, it was really neat to meet her. So
Nice.
yeah, it was a super cool convention. There was even a museum there where they had a bunch of stuff on display. They had all the vampire, well, I not say all, but they had several vampire things from Bram Stoker's Dracula, the 92 one, which is, one of my favorite ones. And so they actually had the full body suit of Gary Oldman and the like almost werewolf vampire.
Yeah.
They had him and his bat vampire full body suit. And then they had from V. Neil's table several of the faces and busts. It's like there's Gary Oldman's face, death
Right.
mask sort of with all his different appliances and things. And so for me, that was really cool. There were a lot of other things in there as well, but yeah.
This Dead Handbook, is it subtitled Stories from Gravesend Cemetery
Yes. Yep.
by Sarah Richard?
Sarah's Richards. Yep.
Okay. Oh, here's a cheap one on use. I love that kind of art, that kind of black and white art.
Yeah, me too. And I just,
really nice.
I loved hearing her story that she worked on it during the pandemic and not going out to sell her art and things everywhere gave her a chance to really focus on digital art, which isn't her comfort zone, and explore that and create this book. So
that actually makes those of us who had the same opportunity and squandered it rather resentful of, you know.
I know, right?
That's like, well, I rewatched Seinfeld 5 times. What do you mean I didn't accomplish anything?
Right.
Well,
World tour of Pizza Hut pizza is complete.
that's right.
Hey, speaking of monsters, did you guys see the Robert Englund cameo on Stranger Things?
Yes.
Yes.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I was
That
like,
was
it's not the
awesome.
same guy. Oh, they're sneaking him in there. Nice.
I love that.
There were a lot of little nods to.
Well, there's a lot of, I
Betty
saw on Twitter, there were a lot of people basically saying this is the best Nightmare on Elm Street movie yet. Or words to that effect.
That's harsh.
Weren't you emotionally involved in episode 3 when I think the girl was in danger?
Me?
Yeah.
What girl?
Or maybe you haven't gotten there yet. Maybe it's in 4.
No, I'm in episode 6. I'm just trying to remember what you're referring
Max.
to. Oh yeah, Max is such a cool character.
I was really worried they were going to kill her off.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's Kate Bush's song has risen up the charts too
Yeah, I
from
was gonna say the
this
same thing.
season.
Nice, yeah.
No,
Push up
what-
in the
Pretty
mind.
awesome.
When I'm watching Stranger Things, it's like I feel like get back to Hawkins because that's the part I'm really loving.
Yeah,
You know,
they will.
get back to Max and all those guys.
Yeah.
And
Whole new
then
generation
you've
of
got the
kids.
Alaska.
Yeah.
Sorry.
A whole new generation of kids discovering Kate Bush. That's nice though. I like that.
And the Alaska stuff. I don't know what to think of that yet. So
There's a reason
yeah,
you get there.
I'm
You'll see.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting that where they stopped it. I don't know how I feel about Becca and things, but we'll see. We'll see how the second half goes.
This is a compliment to all the panelists and the guests on this show, not just a compliment to me.
Yeah.
But I keep getting emails or messages from people saying that I'm looking at one right now. She joined the Patreon and I emailed her and I said, thanks for joining, like I try to do, instead of just a bot email. And she said, thank you, glad to be here. This podcast helped get me through lockdown. I love it.
Nice.
And this is like, I don't know. It just means a lot to me. On the one hand, it can be seen as, we're not, it's not heart surgery or anything like that. And I understand that. But when somebody tells you that you helped them through a difficult situation, it just really feels good. And I want to emphasize it's not just me, it's all the panelists, especially Carpenter.
Yeah, of course.
And the guests. So,
More
well, you
me
are the
than-
one that hands out
more
the
me
prizes.
than the guests, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It depends on the guest.
Right.
And
Present company accepted.
you actually you are the one who gives out the prizes. So
Right.
but I'm repeatedly told that Rick's more important than I am, which I totally agree. So
Wikipedia for the win.
Wikipedia. Nice.
yeah, exactly. So all right, we'll say goodbye, and you got some prizes to hand out, Matt.
Yes,
you want to
I
repeat that?
do remember. This is a novel from Arkham Horror, so it's from the Fantasy Flight game line. It's called The Last Ritual by S.A. Sidor. If you want to win a copy, you want to be entered to win the copy, rather, send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com and put ritual in the subject heading, and you'll be entered into our random drawing.
And I will watch my mailbox for that Sarah Richmond, is that her name? Let's see here. Sarah Richard book. I'm going to watch my mailbox for you to send that to me, Bridget. So I'm going to wait by the mailbox every day.
I sent an email with the. I could send an email with the Kindle edition of Gladiator.
Oh yeah, it's 99 cents. I noticed. if I'm looking at the right thing.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, 99 cents. So yeah, I'm definitely going to read that, Rick. Thank you for the recommendation. Anyway,
I'm sorry, just real quick. Did you mention that the links you put for Pete's thoughts on the movies he's watched?
no, I did not keep them there. I'm going to put them in the show notes
Okay.
for next week when he's here, because
Okay.
it's more fun to harass him when he's actually present. So
Okay.
he probably is not even sick. He probably knew you were going to do this.
It's a possibility.
Yeah.
This one, we mentioned Love and Robots earlier.
Yes.
The good episode called Bad Sailing, which may be the best of the last season. It's sort of William Hope Hodgson on steroids.
Okay. Which season is it?
It's the third season. It's called
Okay.
Bad Sailing. It's written by a modern writer, but he's doing sort of an homage to the Hodgson sort of sea horror type of novel.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I'm definitely going to watch more of those. So, well, anyway, everyone, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Richard, thank you for being here today. It was great talking with you.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Sure thing. And once again, his book is Spontaneous Human Combustion by Richard Thomas. It's available in print, Kindle, and Audible. So yeah. Everybody have a good rest of your Sunday or whenever you're listening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.